Good afternoon. I'm so pleased that you all are joining us today, and I thank you for your patience as we figured out a few technical difficulties. This is part of what it is like to try and do education in this new COVID-19 time. And so I deeply thank you for your patience as we got Dr. Perry on and as we prepared our technology to be able to engage with all of you this afternoon. And so I want to start out by welcoming you to this series. In a COVID-19 educational time and space, we at American University School of Education know that educators need new tools and new ideas to continue to foster teaching and learning in both equitable and excellent ways. And this is exactly why American University School of Education is hosting this webinar series to support educators and education leaders in this endeavor. And we will be holding a webinar every Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. beginning today. And so we're especially excited to be able to kick this series off with you. This is the very first webinar in this series, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. This particular webinar in this series is entitled After Coronavirus Subsides, We Must Protect Students and Teachers. And I want to say that we're especially thrilled to have Dr. Andre Perry join us today to give this webinar. I'll introduce him in just a moment, but I also wanted to mention that going forward, we have a number of very exciting webinar topics. And if you go back to the webpage for the School of Education at American University, you'll get to see the series going forward, including everything from leading from a perspective of whole child education and partnering with communities, to science education during this time, to trauma support, and even to lessons learned from higher education and online learning practices using culturally relevant techniques and how that could apply to K-12 education and education leaders. So we have a really wonderful lineup in the future, and I hope you will join us in the future as well. But I know your time is valuable, and so with that, I'm very excited to be able to introduce Dr. Andre Perry, who is a scholar in residence at the School of Education at American University, also a fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings Institute, and a columnist for the Hechinger Report. He's a nationally known and respected commentator on race, structural inequality, and education, and is a regular contributor to MSNBC, and has been published by the New York Times, The Nation, Washington Post, and many others. His research focuses on race and structural inequality, education, and economic inclusion. And I want to highlight particularly that he is the author of a forthcoming book coming very soon entitled Knowing Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, which is being released by Brookings Institution Press in this May. And in particular, his experiences serving on Louisiana Governor-elect John Bel Edwards' K-12 Education Transition Committee, as well as New Orleans Mayor-elect Mitch Landrieu's Transition Committee and its co-chair for education in 2010, serves as a really useful backdrop. I know that many educators and education leaders in this time are wondering, how does education continue and take place during and in the aftermath of a national crisis such as we have here, and what a better way to learn about those issues and how they play out in terms of teachers, educators, and education leaders and inequality than learning from an expert who has been in the space and time of educating during crisis. And so we are so fortunate to have Dr. Andre Perry, a panelist for this particular webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Perry.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andre Perry. I'm a fellow at the Brookings Institution, and I'm also a scholar in residence at American University. So this is actually me doing my job, what I'm supposed to do, and it's a pleasure to do it. I want to say that I've had a couple of webinars. Every once in a while, the signal goes down just for a few minutes or a few seconds. So bear with us if there is a slight pause in the transmission. I also wanted to say, I know that folks are going through it, and I just want to say, hold on, be strong. This is one of the things that we should be doing during this time. We may have to stay distant, but we must be connected. And that we have to use every bit of technology we can to stay connected. I'm going to draw a lot from my experiences in Hurricane Katrina to relay what I think ultimately will help protect teachers and others and students during this time. Unfortunately, we've been down similar roads before, nothing quite like a pandemic, but understand that there are people who deal with these inevitable shocks regularly, whether it's Hurricane Katrina or Maria. It was a housing bubble. It was the stock bubble. I was around for 9/11. There are several events in which it changes or upends our society, the way we operate, and we do not return to normal. There are things that stay with us for the long haul. But I'm going to present to you today that there are things that we have got to protect ourselves against when this particular epidemic subsides. For those who want to get a lot of this information, you can purchase my book, Know Your Price, which is right here. It's going to be released May 19th. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about can be found in my book. But let's get right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is just the impact on colleges and universities. Many of you are students, faculty, staff at colleges and universities. One of the things that we have to be mindful of, faculty have to stay in contact with their students and ask them the difficult question: how are you eating? How are you sleeping? What is your emotional state? Many students are going through a very difficult time. And remember, for some campuses, not all, a lot of campuses that are that have a lot of commuters, or they're on online programs, that we don't know if they're about their housing situation. We don't know where they've gone. We don't know what kind of access to the internet and computers they have. And so faculty must do their best job to stay in contact with students. And this webinar is, in fact, one of the things that you have to do. We have to replace some of the social functions that occur naturally in a face-to-face environment. We have to replace them with virtual ones. And that means seminars, that means just getting in contact with your students and faculty have to stay in contact with each other. Many faculty members will struggle with this time alone, whereas a lot of faculty members are natural introverts, so they might find some comfort in being at home, but nothing is quite like this where you're cut off a lot from society. So we need to make sure that as a community that students are maintain community. The research is clear that faculty-student interaction is a significant factor in whether or not people graduate or not. And so if you're a student, make sure you stay in contact with your faculty member. If you're a faculty member, make sure you stay in contact with your student. Do things not just in response to assignments, but do things in a very social way to protect yourselves and others. And students, I can't say this enough. be honest about the state of where you are right now. If you're not feeling well, if you need someone to talk to, those university resources that were available to you in the face-to-face manner, universities are catching up to make sure that they can get the counseling services, the job employment services, all those things. So be patient if they're not in place, but understand that you need to stay connected during these times and be honest about what you are. Now I'm going to quickly pivot, make a hard pivot onto the K-12 arena. A lot of attention has been paid to the K-12 arena thus far. And I'm just going to share my thoughts, what I've learned after Hurricane Katrina. One, you lose students. Katrina taught me that any kind of break in normalcy, you're going to lose students. Some students will be in contact, others will not, meaning you have to stay in contact with parents who are struggling right now to work at times. Remember, a lot of folks are still have to work. Your bus drivers, your retail workers, all those folks still have to work, yet they have children at home. And so you have got to figure out ways to not only lessen the burden on your parents, but finding out ways to communicate regularly with those students. Ask them, are your parents home? How is messaging best delivered during these times? You have to figure out where the parent and the child are positioned in terms of work, in terms of housing, in terms of this basic services as you move forward. We've been at this a month and we're still working out the kinks. We know that there are some districts, some of you are out there where they have not come up with plans to distribute laptops. They do not have plans around hotspots and internet access. And so some of you are using telephone technology to communicate what's going on or the assignments. Do whatever you can. Just understand that the infrastructure in many places aren't conducive for home-based learning. And so we've got to work around as much as possible, but get in contact with your students. Another thing is that we lose teachers during this moment. I recently wrote a column on the loss of teachers during this time. After Katrina, yes, folks were dispersed all across the country. People eventually returned. Around 2 years after folks returned, you started to see mass and they left the profession largely because I think we had a pause, but I'm going to just barrel through. So many folks, I think I'm back on right now. I think there was a pause, but we have to make sure that your teachers are okay. Again, we lost many teachers due to early retirements. Many will feel, because of their age, that they don't want to return quickly to their jobs. Many, and this is going to be the harsh reality, and I'll segue quickly into this. There will be a recession. And what that means for schools is that state budgets will be constrained. So in not this particular academic year, but when the budgets really start, the tax revenues stop coming in. You're going to see school districts and states go into some type of austerity measure. And that means they are going to determine who is essential and what is essential. And who's not essential oftentimes are your support workers, your teaching aides, your community liaison, some of your administrative support. A lot of them will be laid off or fired during next year. So in between a loss of retirees and support service, it's going to be difficult for many teachers. And so we have to demand that the unions, teacher groups, education support groups make sure that they advocate for funding for states in order to get out of this crisis. The last round of COVID relief really did not include the states. It focused on businesses, big businesses, small businesses, and it focused on getting checks out to workers, particularly those who are struggling to make ends meet. It did not include states. So I expect state revenues to drop dramatically. And I also expect, and this is, you know, you don't need to be a truth seer to understand this, but you're going to see a lot of austerity measures that's going to constrain teachers, and it's going to discourage people from getting into the profession, and it's going to encourage people from leaving the profession. The thing that's going to stay with us, though, remember, something always stays with us after a tragedy. We never are quite the same, and we should not be. And it's becoming clear that some form of online learning will be a part of our education moving forward. Higher ed has already moved in this space where it is very difficult to go through an entire program and not have any online courses. That's just the nature of the beast right now. Same is going to be true for K-12 education, where for the most part, we've worked within a face-to-face environment. Yes, there are virtual schools, there are online services, certainly there, but that's going to expand greatly in the next in the summer months, you're going to see rapid change. They've always been an effort to expand the school year without resources, mind you. But there's always been an effort to elongate the school year to even go to an all-year model. This actually is possible with many of the online tools that we're currently utilizing. We're practicing in real time how to use this stuff. In a year or two, we will be refining these structures and these practices in ways that will transform the profession completely. And that means, and I'm going to go into training and actually salary a little bit. That means folks are going to have to not learn on the fly as we're doing now, but actually get adequate training in using these devices. That these things, the online platforms are not going to go away, they're going to expand, but we must become better equipped to connect with students using them. Automation in this regard may help. We should not have to do the grading and attendance and all these different things. Eventually, automation should help with that so that teachers can actually be in the business of teaching and instructing, doing what's humanly possible. I've written in the past that we need to to be cautious of AI because many districts have used AI in a way to supplant the teacher workforce. And I really think that's going to happen in next year, where you're going to see layoffs in districts trying to use technology to replace teachers. The reality is that teaching is a higher order profession that requires a person to do. And so we're going to have to beat back these tendencies to optimize, quote unquote, optimize our resources by getting rid of humans in that endeavor. And so this, again, this is where mobilization, your labor unions, and if you're in a state that does not allow for collective bargaining, clearly there's going to be some struggles on the labor front, as we have seen for Red for Ed in the conservative states, folks striking, mobilizing. But, and I'm not suggesting that you do, I'm not opposed to that either, but understand that the next fight will be around state budgets, and what you are willing to live with will depend on how, what kind of concessions that you will make moving forward. The same is true for students. And I can't say this enough. I learned this from Katrina. The least vulnerable, those with special needs, those with who may need speech therapy or are hampered physically and they're not getting the attention they deserve, we're going to have to come up with solutions. Districts are going to have to come up with solutions, because right now, those are the children that are really being left behind, those who can't utilize the support services that they enjoyed. If you, I have a child I have a child who in his high school years and middle school years, he was, had a learning disability, or he was considered mentally disabled. And he required several different therapists and special supports. And I can't even imagine in this environment how school districts are handling that. And right now they're not, for the most part. And so we're going to have to come up with ways to check in on students, to provide those kind of services in the absence of face-to-face, because as many of you know, a lot of school districts are essentially shut down for the entire year. Others are certainly closed through May. And so this is an issue that is going to hurt many students who are vulnerable moving forward. I'm going to, lastly, before I close out and we go into some questions, a lot of what I am concerned about is what happens when kids return. How do you cope with a new normal? Now, the students, because of this elongated break, it's going to be, because you have to keep in mind, you're going to probably add on summer to this. It's going to be somewhat challenging for students to get back into a groove, and it stresses out students. I remember many teachers, and this is one of the reasons why many teachers left the profession in Katrina, after Katrina, is because once they returned, it was a very different environment for teachers. Students were struggling emotionally. Parents were struggling, and it's going to be hard. And so this is where I do believe we need to beef up our counseling services to make make sure that they are present in the overall planning of the school as they reopen. That's what I really wanted to lead with. I really wanted to stay open to questions. I wanted to talk for a half an hour, right at that half an hour. And so at this point, I want to just entertain questions, because I know that you may see. Whoop, whoop. Let me go over here because I'm running out of power. Answer live. I'm going to answer this question live. The question is, can you talk about the racial implications of COVID-19? What should we be doing about racialized firings of the most vulnerable? Great question. And I'm going to answer that right now as I try to power up my, put the computer on power.
And Andre, while you're doing that, can I just jump in? Because I just want to make sure that, first of all, I want to thank you so much for your comments, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the questions from our panel, from our audience. Audience, one of the things that you'll see is that the chat function actually only works for the panelists to chat out things to you all. But if you do have a question, you can put it in, if you use your cursor and move it to the bottom of your screen, you'll see at the bottom next to participants is something that says Q&A. And I already see some participants are using that for questions, but that's where you can type in a question. It does not go to the entire group, to the entire webinar participants. It will just go to Dr. Perry, and he can read and respond to those. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew how to ask a question that way.
Yeah, you know, the question that was just posed about the racialized nature of education, and particularly as it pertains to teachers, is something that I write set of charter providers who did not necessarily, who essentially had contracts with alternative CERT programs that was comprised mostly of white individuals. So, so charters worked with the Teach for Americas and other organizations that were not diverse, and did not hire local teachers who worked in the prior system before Katrina, for the most part. The Black population among teachers went from 70% to essentially 50% within 10 years. And a lot of that is because they did not see the value of Black teachers moving forward. We know that students who are exposed to teacher of color, particularly Black teachers, but for all students, they get better outcomes when they are exposed to a diverse set of teachers. And so, but when your budgets are constrained, and again, going back, you have to decide who's essential. You get to see how our racial attitudes play out. We see not in necessarily who's hired, or not in necessarily who's fired or let go, but who's hired in the aftermath. That's when we see racial issues play out. It's important to note, and folks who follow my work also know, that I talk about education in the context of society. So understand that Black families have about 1/10 the amount of wealth that white families have. So how that plays out, you can be a shocks can really take people back significantly. And so you see people losing their homes, you see people losing colleagues, and sometimes losing their life because they don't have the cushion of wealth. And that plays itself out in schools as well. I'm going to go to another question. Do you see a need for new policies related to mental health needs of students? Absolutely. We should be screening, especially when this COVID moment subsides. We should have check-ins, and not in the sort of an overbearing or explicit way, but we should have check-ins with students that really go deeper than just saying, hey, are you okay? After events like this, folks are stressed and strained, and we need support services. Just understand that in the same way that testing for COVID has not reached Black and Brown communities, we also don't test for other things among Black and Brown communities. And so we need to make sure that we find a way to monitor and to check in with students and teachers in terms of the stresses that they have. I'm going to move to this next question. What should we do to support for support for our teachers when they re-enter into physical school? Will we need additional support for them? Absolutely, yes. Going back to school will be tough. I've been telling districts, just as you need a week or a couple weeks of orientation in the beginning of the year, you're going to need that after this event. That it's going to take some time before we truly go back to normal, and we're not going to go back to normal completely. And so I've been advising districts to make sure you give yourselves time to give teachers a sense of normalcy, and to create systems that will help deal with a student body that is stressed out. And so, yes, we need to prepare for that. Unfortunately, you're going to have less resources to do it. That again, I explained that the loss of revenue is going to significantly impact budgets, and there will probably be less resources. I've been arguing, do not allow them to districts and states to strip mental health related resources out of budgets. That is, you do not want to see that happen. Trust me on that one. How might you recommend we advocate at the state and district levels to make mental health a priority and not necessarily cut school counselors who are the initial access to resources? Yeah, this is where I lean on representation, labor to help out. But it also helps to write the op-eds, to encourage parents to talk to their elected officials. During this time, you will be busy. You will be busy with your home life, your profession. We need great representation after storms, from elected officials, from union reps, from you. Is make or encourage your leaders. And that encourage, and I say this, it encourage your college, your dean, your principal, your district leaders. They are going to have to represent you, because you can't do it all, nor should you. And so lean on your representation as much as possible. Do you think health will become and should become more important in the work of schools and how schools think of what they do? Absolutely. My favorite quote, one of my favorite education quote, education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. Use this tragedy as a learning tool on how to take care of ourselves. One of the, if you're a science teacher, you have to jump on this in this moment to teach about not only how viruses work, but also how ideas spread. Like, take these concepts that you're teaching in school and expand upon them in ways that resonate with students. Now, yes, we understand this virus is spreading. We understand the nature of viruses. But we also just have to understand the nature of health and mental health in this environment as well. So use this moment to say, hey, this is why not only do we wash our hands, but this is why we have to wash our hands to stay connected as a community, because we can't keep living in isolation like this. We need to make health a priority moving forward. Do you think COVID is different from Katrina, given that it's contagious? How may the disasters be different? One, there's some fundamental differences in that. One, folks had to leave an entire city, and it's different that folks are going home. But what is similar, that we found out that a lot of people really don't have a home to go to after events like this. You quickly see the students who have housing insecurities, who have food insecurities. Remember, some of you are in different states, in different areas. A lot of states do not have mechanisms to see whether or not their children are actually in a home until they just don't show up for these online lessons. And many districts, mind you, aren't doing things online because of a lack of access, or there's significant unevenness in who's receiving online materials. And so it's very difficult. But what I learned from Katrina is that do not take for granted that someone has a home. How it's similar also is that this is a man-made sort of disaster, if you will, that it wasn't like a housing bubble that occurred over time. Yes, that was man-made, but this is a little bit, what I'm trying to describe is different. Hurricane Katrina, the economic impact resulted because we had to disperse. The same is true, that the economic crisis is really because we have to maintain social distance. So the recovery is going to be a lot faster in terms of economic growth than it is a housing crisis. And so we're going to probably use this moment to hire people. There will be new jobs created. But I just worry that in education, that folks are going to use this moment as an excuse to let teachers go, because there's always a group who are looking to replace teachers with technology, to do asynchronous types of platforms where you can teach hundreds and hundreds of students instead of a few dozen. But I'm very worried about that. How do we give our students closure on the school year grade now that so many districts are closing for the rest of the year? And this is where you're going to have to be creative. Come up with new traditions. That graduation and the last days of school are so ingrained in our culture. But we're going to have to come up with new traditions in this moment. And I don't have an answer for that, but it's really incumbent upon you and your students, asking them, what can we do to honor completion in this moment? So use the moments that you have together to come up with new traditions. That's one of the things that's going to keep folks motivated moving forward. So don't just make this your interactions online or on the phone with students an academic exercise. Try to figure out new traditions moving forward. Let's see. Multiple acts of harassment and profiling surfacing on social media that African American men are having to endure while wearing masks to protect themselves is deplorable. How can we battle the virus and the racism that is happening that is just as deadly and not feel defeated and hopeless? I'm going to answer that using a long-range strategy. This is why in your courses, you have to talk about, use these moments to talk about racial equity, justice, and other issues that are affecting our students. It's not only the harassment from wearing masks and other things, it's the there are food deserts. There are limited opportunities to go out in many areas. I see that my internet is unstable, so hopefully we're connected. But we're going to have to figure out ways in the long term to address racial inequality. For older students, they can buy my book, give it to the high schoolers, where I talk about structural inequality. These are the moments during emergent situations. If you don't just focus on the acute nature of this moment, think about what you have to do to protect people in the long run. And that means in our courses, figuring out ways to address racial equity and justice so that we're prepping future generations so that they won't respond stereotypically when something like this happens. That there's a long range struggle that we're in. Again, I've been writing about history. You know, the 1619 Project, for instance, that's what this is about. When we give our students the right amount of information, they're less likely to respond as racist adults moving forward. I cringe every time I think about, like in Alabama, folks almost elected, I'm blanking on the candidate's name, who ran against Doug Jones. And I used to say, hey, how in the world does this person who's accused of pedophilia, multiple accounts of sexism, multiple accounts of racism, how does this person keep getting elected? And I keep saying, because a lot of that has to do about what he's taught. This is the same person who said, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, that same person who said that slavery was good for Black people. And remember, that's how a lot of our history books are taught, that slavery was just an employment issue, believe it or not. And so you're going to have to go deeper in your coursework in order to deal with these issues. But again, you know, be a part of a movement. I say, hey, follow your favorite authors and join an organization. It might be the Urban League, it might be the NAACP, it might be another organization, it might be something your teacher unions are doing, it might be a group that you and your colleagues form. But to combat racism, you can't do it alone. You have to do it in groups. You have to do it in an association. And so join something that is working on these issues. Oh, now tell us more about your book and what prompted you to write this. Well, my book is in general about devaluation and how we have to value Black people and property. Now, I start off by explaining the historical nature of devaluation, how it impacted property and how it impacts everything else. If you follow me, you know that I look at housing prices in Black communities. We control for education, crime, and walkability, and all those other fancy metrics. And what we found, homes in Black neighborhoods are devalued by 23%, about 48,000 per home. And that amounts to about 156 billion in lost equity. That 156 billion that's lost in Black communities should be going to schools, should be going to infrastructure, should be going to families to start a business or send their kids to college. All those things matter upon schools. Some of the reasons why schools are underfunded, a significant reason why schools are underfunded, is because of our system of how we fund education through property taxes, and how easy it is for us to underfund poor districts. And so I look at devaluation, and I offer up solutions to it in education, in housing, in healthcare, in economic development. So all of these things matter. I say this all the time. Kids don't live in schools; they live in communities. You hear people say, if we can only fix the school, everything else will be better. Well, that's just simply not true. As much as I am an education nut, I love education, I love writing about education. Education is just one of the factors that determine one's life trajectory. It's an important one. But as we see, if health is off, education is going to be down. If people are poor, education is throttled by that. If schools are hurt, health is going to be down. All of these things interact, and so I show that interaction, and I also show how we can value Black lives and Black people by investing in education, housing, economic development, and all those other issues. I'll close out with the story of how the book name Know Your Price came to be. That Know Your Price comes from my favorite play, Two Trains Running. In the play, the main character, Memphis, is about to have his property seized through eminent domain by the city of Pittsburgh, where I'm from. They offer the main character, Memphis, $15,000 for his restaurant. The main character says, no, I'm not selling my restaurant for $15,000. I know my price. And it's a refrain throughout the play. I got my price. I know my price. I got my price. There's another character in the play, Hambone, who paints a fence for a ham in exchange for a ham. He paints the fence, but he never gets his ham. He says, give me my ham, give me my ham, give me my ham, all throughout the play until he goes crazy and dies. Now, there's actually a happy ending. I know you're like, dang, that's sad. But the main character, Hambone, gets $35,000. And the moral of the story should be clear. One, you got to know you have to have worth. Know your worth. More importantly, for me, what I give people is a price to stand on. What are they willing to stand on? This is the amount you have to stand on. I do that in economic development. And so the goal is the book is to say, hey, Know that you have value, that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. That if we get to these policy issues, then we will make, then people will be better off. And so let's work on the policy issues that's throttling achievement in education, that's throttling advancements in housing, that's throttling economic development. And those negative attitudes that are not allowing us to hire Black teachers, that are not seeing the value in counselors and other services. We got to stand on our price to show, hey, that counselors matter now more than ever. But it's going to take mobilizing and demanding our price in order to do that. I think, let me, wow, you just got a couple. I got a couple more questions, and I will do that. I want to say, did we say we're going to what time? I just want to be respectful of the time.
4 o'clock.
Okay, so I'll just hit up, I'll try to pick one last question. Oh man, I'll take the leadership question. We need leaders who understand that this moment is an opportunity to find long-term solutions to the problems that put us in this predicament. That yes, we must see and address these emergent issues, but good leadership will see this as an opportunity to build structures to prevent the next tragedy. I want our leaders to develop a racial equity lens, for instance, that allow their this work in education to help prevent the kind of discrimination that's occurring currently among folks in power. But we need more solutions. We need technology solutions. We need classroom-based solutions. We need mental health solutions. Again, this tragedy, this epidemic, this pandemic will subside, but we better have some structures in place in our colleges, in our districts, in our schools that recognize that there were people who were made vulnerable by past policy, and we got to correct those policies so that we won't have the problems of the past. So I'll close. I'll leave it at that. We have 2 minutes, so I'll let the leaders take it from here. Make sure you unmute.
I'm all right. So, Andre, Dr. Perry, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure, both to hear about your book and your recent scholarship, and also your book has deep relevance to the current moment. And so I deeply appreciate that, as well as just hearing your own thoughts and your reflections on the foundation and the basis for what school leaders need to be considering and educators need to be considering in this place and time. So I hope that all the participants really enjoyed having a full hour with Dr. Perry to talk this over. And I want to say I deeply appreciate that you left so many time for questions. Clearly there was a lot of interest in hearing, personally from you. And so thank you for that piece. I also wanted to mention that in the School of Education, as I mentioned, we're having these series this webinar series weekly for educators from 3 to 4 on Fridays. And I put into the chat the website where you can see the future webinars coming up. Next week, we will have a webinar for learning good techniques and tools for teaching online science education. So that'll be an exciting and different webinar. Things you'll see is that each week there's really different topics, but all of them will certainly have a thread of equity during this time and space. So thank you so much to everybody for joining. Thank you to Dr. Perry for volunteering your time to share with the community these really important insights. And I will look forward to seeing you all hopefully next week for our webinar series for educators. And one final thing, which is that I wanted to mention that for any of you who are parents or caretakers, we are also running a similar webinar series for parents and caretakers that runs on Wednesday nights from 7 to 8 p.m.
Oh, wow.
On various topics, hoping to reach out to communities, parents and caregivers who are deeply needing these tools as well for how to support their students in the home. So, so thanks for your support in all of this, and I hope everybody stays healthy and well and feels supported during this time. Thank you, everybody.